Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is an entitled People Story. When my wife and I bought our house last year, one of the main reasons was the emergency parking spot right out front. My wife has a serious heart condition, so having that spot for ambulances was crucial in case she ever had an emergency. All our neighbors were aware of the purpose of the spot and were respectful not to park there. Well, all except one, our neighbor Karen. From the first week she moved in, Karen decided that spot was hers to use whenever she felt like it. At first, I tried asking her nicely not to park there, but Karen always had some excuse. She'd be quick, she was late for work, etc. No matter how much I emphasized the medical purpose of that spot, she just didn't care. One night, Karen took things too far. My wife suddenly collapsed while we were eating dinner. She was gasping for breath and clutching her chest in agony. I immediately called police, describing her symptoms and the urgency of the situation. The dispatcher assured me help was on the way. I rushed outside to wait for the ambulance, only to find none other than Karen's shiny BMW parked right in the emergency spot. Panic surged through me. I banged on Karen's front door, yelling, "It's an emergency, you need to move your car." Of course, she took forever, sauntering to the door with an annoyed look on her face. "Karen, my wife is having a heart attack. The ambulance needs this spot. You need to move now," I shouted. She stared back coldly. "I just got home. I'm not moving it." I was speechless. How could someone be so heartless? The wail of sirens grew closer. Still parked illegally, Karen just stood there with her arms crossed. There was no time. I ran back inside and found my wife barely conscious, her breathing dangerously shallow. The paramedics rushed in with the stretcher just as she lost consciousness. With the spot blocked, they were forced to wheel her father down the driveway. Every second delayed was critical. As they loaded my wife into the back of the ambulance, I saw Karen peering out her window with zero remorse. Fury boiled up inside me. I took photos of her car and called to get it towed immediately. Thankfully, the tow truck driver was quick. Soon the spot was cleared and the ambulance sped away with lights flashing. My heart pounded, worry consuming me. I followed behind, praying my wife would hold on. At the hospital, doctors managed to stabilize her, though it was touch and go for a while. The stress on her heart had been dangerously close to fatal. Filled with relief, she was all right. My anger returned towards Karen. I knew I had to take action against such callous disregard for my wife's life. Once home, I called the police and filed a report, including the photos proving Karen had obstructed an emergency vehicle. The next day, 2 officers showed up at Karen's door. I watched through my window as they questioned her. Even then, she had the audacity to downplay the situation, but thankfully the officers knew better. A week later, I received notice that charges were being pressed against Karen. When she realized the trouble she was in, Karen came pounding on my door, yelling that I had ruined her life. I simply shut the door in her face. At the court date, the judge was appalled by Karen's actions. My wife testified about her medical condition and need for that spot. In the end, Karen was found guilty of obstructing emergency services. She was sentenced to 6 months in jail. I also filed a restraining order against her. Justice was served. My wife and I can now feel safe, knowing that spot will remain clear for any future emergencies. Though dealing with Karen was an ordeal, the outcome sent a clear message. Entitled "Behavior that puts lives at risk will not be tolerated." Our neighbors have been fully supportive, even bringing meals while my wife recovered. This experience revealed the compassion and care of our community, and Karen was the sole exception. Her selfish actions landed her exactly where she deserved. The next one is a pro-revenge story. My former boss is the worst human being I've ever met. He did all sorts of things to mess with anyone he didn't like. So a while ago, I was at a family event in a local park, walking with a young boy from our family who is developmentally disabled with Down syndrome, Ben. Ben does fairly well, all things considered, but he's always been sensitive to anyone making fun of the way he looks or his condition. We are just having a good time on our little stroll, Ben and I both enjoying the day. Along comes my boss walking toward us. I'll call him Rob. I cringe at seeing him but smile and say hello to play nice. Rob: "There's something you don't see every day. A pair of ugly retards walking together." Ben bursts into tears as Rob laughs and walks off. I deal with Ben and ignore Rob. I'm super pissed and trying to calm Ben down because for a few minutes he was totally distraught. Finally, I get Ben to focus on how he has me and a lot of other awesome friends and family, and that Rob is a stranger, and what he thinks doesn't matter. We walked some more, and I saw that Rob was at the park with his wife and teen daughter having a cookout. and he had apparently been on his way back to his family from a trip to the toilet when he saw us. Back to being super pissed. I went back to our gathering and talked to an adult cousin of mine, Jake, telling him what happened. Jake wanted to get revenge on Rob, but I reminded him that this was my boss. I didn't want Rob to be able to know the revenge had anything to do with me, because then he'd make my work life even worse than he already had. So Jake asked me for anything I knew about Rob that might help. I told Jake a bunch of things about Rob, but the relevant info here is that Rob liked to drink a particular kind of locally made beer at a certain bar. Rob had talked about having drunk there on the previous Friday night, while his wife and daughter were away visiting her family. Also, Rob had recently told a story at work about his wife's obsession with a particular little green fictional character. Let's call it Yabi Boda. Turns out his wife kept a stuffed Yabi Boda on their bed at all times. I wasn't there for the revenge setup itself because I didn't want Rob to see me, but Jake filled in the details afterward. It was basically this. Jake approached Rob and put an arm around his shoulders and tried to kiss him. Rob pushes him off. Rob, what are you doing? Rob's family is now paying attention. Jake, I am just so excited to see you, sweetie. Friday night was so amazing. Rob, what are you talking about? Jake, seriously, you're going to act like you don't remember now? I know you were a bit tipsy after all of those specific local beers at the local bar, but certainly you remember what happened later. Rob, nothing happened later. Or ever. I don't even know your name. Jake, really? You were screaming it on Friday. Rob, turning red. You lying son of a Rob's wife, interrupting. Listen, I don't know who you are, but this is my husband. I'm sure you have him mistaken for someone else. Please just leave us alone. Jake, oh no, I'm not mistaken. We had the best sex ever on Friday night, and now he's acting like he doesn't even know me. Rob's wife, I told you this is my husband, you're mistaken. Jake, oh maybe I am. I guess it was someone else who took me back to his place on Rob's street, and had great sex with me on the bed right next to Yabi Boda. Sorry. Jake turns and walks away. Rob's wife. Oh my god, Rob, what the duck is wrong with you? You're gay now, really? Already long story made a bit shorter. Rob's wife wasn't real happy with him anyway, and this was apparently the tipping point that made her file for divorce soon thereafter. Rob frequently complained at work in the following months about how he didn't care about his wife, but really missed his daughter and how much it sucked to live in his new place compared to his old home. Every time he complained about his lack of a home life at work, I knew he did it to himself when he was mean to a developmentally disabled kid. The best part is he never figured out I was involved at all. The next one is a petty revenge story. This happened when I was 15 and in grade 5. In South Africa, our school year starts in January and ends in December. This story took place around July. It's probably worth noting that I've only ever seen my mother lose her temper less than 10 times collectively. She's generally a very soft and calm person. This comes up later. My family and I had just gotten home from Germany because we were attending my brother's wedding. I arrived 2 days late, so when my teacher was handing out math homework booklets, I didn't get one. I was a pretty shy kid and didn't like asking for things, so every week I'd ask my mother to inquire in the parent group chat for a picture of that week's math homework. After 2 weeks, she asked why I didn't have a booklet, so I told her I wasn't given one after the holiday. She knows I'm an anxious person, so instead of telling me to ask my teacher myself, she wrote a note and told me to give it to her the next day. I did. Needless to say, Mrs. Karen was upset and yelled at me from across the room, saying, "You're such a useless child, why didn't you say anything? I honestly don't know why I got stuck with such a stupid class this year, not to mention how your mother has been abusing the parent group chat every day for 2 weeks. I started to cry. She kept yelling at me for about 2 more minutes before telling me to go to every single one of the 6 classes in my grade and ask for a spare math booklet so I can photocopy it. I was still pretty teary-eyed, and my eyes were red and puffy. I didn't want to get yelled at, so I just did what she said, and thankfully the nice teacher, Mr. Adamson, gave me his booklet, and even later asked if I was okay. When I got home, my mom was just about to head off to buy some things at the mall. She told me that she wanted to hear how my day went and asked if I wanted to tell her on our way to the mall. I said sure. We got in the car, and I told her everything that happened that day. I could feel the car get faster, and her hands were shaking because she was gripping the steering wheel so firmly. When we got home, she immediately got on a phone call with my principal and set up a meeting with her, my dad, and my teacher. The next week at school, I heard on the intercom before break that Mrs. Karen was to head to the office for a meeting. I was grinning the entire time. When lunch ended, she pulled me outside the classroom and told me that my parents came. She was crying and her voice was shaky. I got home later that day and asked my dad what happened, and he said to me that he could only describe it as good cop, bad cop. My mother being the bad cop. Needless to say, I didn't have many problems with Mrs. Karen for the rest of the year, and I can now confidently say that whenever I have school issues, I will definitely tell my mother. The next one is a malicious compliance story. I work in IT and have worked with one client for years, looking after their various networks. Normally, it's a 9-5 kind of job, but if something goes wrong after hours, it can become a real emergency for them quickly. One day, the manager came down to visit our small team at this client's office. We were told they renegotiated the contract and took a 5% cut on the job. So they asked if we would all take a 5% pay cut as well. No one accepted that, and we were ready to walk if they tried to push it. The next week, we were told there was to be 0 overtime without prior authorization from the company president himself, and there were no exceptions to this ironclad rule. They had us repeat the new policy back to them and emailed it to us. The only thing I said to them was, "This is going to end poorly." 2 days later, the core router that connects all the different parts of the big data center failed at 9 p.m. Our manager called my cell phone and said to jump in my car because the data center was down. I told him that I didn't have authorization from the company president, who had apparently gone camping for the long weekend with his family and was out of contact. I told him, sorry, I can't do any work as it hasn't been authorized. He tried to say how he's authorizing it. I told him he specifically told us just earlier this week that it has to be from the company president and there are no exceptions. If he can get a hold of the president, then give me a call back. He was mad. The client was mad as they were told I refused to help. He left an angry voicemail for the president about me. They did get it fixed when the manager drove himself to the data center in the wee hours of the morning to pull the bad circuit board. The next business day, first thing in the morning, the manager, the client's CIO, and our company president were waiting for me to come in and told me to come into the meeting room. It went as expected with raised voices, accusations, and many final warnings, until I pulled out the email and gave it to the client's CIO to read. It took him 10 seconds to read, and then the CIO asked me to head back to my desk and carry on with my day. I never heard what was said in the room after I left. But there was a new directive that afternoon that over time, work no longer must have prior authorization. I worked another 2 years there before I left for a better job. But to this day, if there is a rule with no exceptions, I relate this exact story and ask them to rethink what they are about to tell us. The next one is an entitled people story. I was born when my mother and father were only 17. It forced both of my parents to drop out of high school and each get a GED so they could find work right away. My father especially was not happy about this because he had dreams of playing football in college, and instead, he had to work at a gas station. He said to my face many times that I ruined his dream. My mother hardly raised me at all as she had to work too. They had a cranky old lady next door watch me most of the time. She wasn't so bad. She gave me more attention than my parents did. My father eventually managed to land a better job as a manager due to his experience running the gas station. It was right after that my mom got pregnant with my sister. I was 6 when she was born. I wasn't exactly shown much love before that, but once my sister came along, it was made pretty obvious to even my 6-year-old self that I was unwanted. The only ones who seemed to care were my paternal grandparents and somewhat my babysitter. And they were more like my parents because they treated me the way a little kid needed to be loved. We lived in a 2-bedroom apartment, and as my sister got older, it went from me sharing a bedroom with her to me kicked out of the room entirely. I slept on the couch for 2 years, and I barely had anything to my name other than clothes, school supplies, and an old Game Boy. When I was 10, my parents decided they were going to move away, but this move did not include me. I ended up actually being fine with this, as my grandparents had agreed to take me in. My life was instantly better. I got my own room again, and my grandparents gifted me a brand new N64 in 1996. That Christmas, I got a Game Boy Pocket too, and there were a couple of other kids my age in the neighborhood I got to hang out with. We rode bikes, played video games, shot cans with pellet guns, built forts, and got dirty playing in the creek. You know, stuff a normal kid would enjoy. I was finally happy. As time went on, I grew up and eventually moved out, but later moved back in to help my grandparents' house as they were getting old and living off their retirement savings, so some rent money from me went a long way in paying the bills. My grandpa was the kind of person who wanted to build a bomb shelter during the Cold War but never got around to it. He wanted to volunteer for the military in the 60s, but was turned down due to a medical condition and the fact his eyesight was not great, so he focused on saving whatever he thought he needed. He told me many times it was better to have something and not need it than need it and not have it. Our area suffered from numerous power outages in winter due to heavy winds and storms, so having gasoline and propane for heaters and generators was a must. All these saving habits became my own as time went on, because it was better to need this stuff rarely than not have it at all. Of course, there was the homeowner association bothering us, but that's its own other story. The problem is, about 5 years back, my grandma died suddenly, and my grandpa was heartbroken. He also went about a year and a half later. Pretty much everything they owned was willed to me. Their savings, their house, their vehicles, their stuff, everything. The house was long paid off, and Grandpa knew how to keep up with its maintenance. In fact, after Grandma died, he kind of doubled down on renovating the place. He had the roof redone, the house was repainted by us inside and out, and we fixed a lot of little things. Grandpa's neighbor George even came by to help redo the plumbing. Ironically, the homeowner association was rather happy with these changes because the house didn't look run down anymore. One morning I was fixing breakfast and my grandpa never came downstairs. You couldn't keep the man from his bacon, so I went to check on him, and he wasn't moving. I called police and paramedics came, only to tell me he'd passed in his sleep. My parents made Grandpa's funeral a crap show. They didn't bother to show up for Grandma's. They were too busy. And at Grandpa's funeral, they didn't seem to grieve at all. My sister also showed up wearing a brightly colored designer dress, which I wasn't happy about as it was a church clothes-only function. I noticed my parents repeatedly whispering to each other and glaring at me whenever I looked at them. Come to find out at the will reading that my parents knew that they'd been disinherited long ago for their treatment of me. And they thought it extremely unfair I got everything. They threatened to sue me to contest the will. And I got repeated calls and messages from my father, mother, and sister telling me I needed to do the right thing and give my father what was supposed to be his. I told them all to flake off in far more unsavory words. My parents ended up taking me to court to challenge the will, but the judge ruled in my favor after seeing the will and hearing us both out. So it wasn't a long, drawn-out legal battle. The judge even looked at my parents with absolute disgust after seeing the will and hearing about their mistreatment of me in my childhood. He called my father a terrible parent, and that my grandparents were right to disown him. My father just hung his head in silence, but he made sure to stop me outside the courtroom and tell me I was always the biggest mistake of his life, and that if he could go back in time, he'd make sure I never existed. He should have been a football star, and instead, he has to wear a name tag for a 9 to 5. I told him that, mistake or not, Grandma and Grandpa could see what kind of nasty person he was. I didn't ask to be born, and the only real love I ever got was from my grandparents, and he was no father of mine anymore. I got a few more threatening and harassing phone calls, as well as some letters from my parents, all demanding money among other things. But over time, they just stopped because I completely stonewalled them, never responded to the emails or letters, and I stayed silent during the phone calls. A few times I just left the phone sitting on the counter with them ranting till they realized I wasn't listening. Aside from not getting the house or money, my parents seemed particularly irked they could not even get a rise out of me. But I was prepared to go to war against them, and they knew it. So in the end, they just left me alone. From what I know looking at Facebook the past decade, my sister tried to get into modeling, got married, had 2 kids, got divorced, and is currently unhappily working a job she feels is beneath her. My mother currently works retail, and is also vocal about her disdain of it. Like my father, she peaked in high school. She was a cheerleader back then, and even had her old uniform framed on the wall. My father has pretty much had the same job for 25 years. He must be good at it if he's still doing it. As for me, well, I'm in my late 30s now, and I live pretty much debt-free in a nice neighborhood. I haven't really had a girlfriend since high school, and I've had little motivation to ever have another relationship. But loneliness gets to everyone, so maybe I'll try to find someone soon. Not many are in the financial position I'm in at my age. Single, paid-off house, 2 vehicles, and a decent amount in the bank. I guess I could aim to be a stepfather. That might be more my speed. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.